Pick up your popcorn, relax into your seat, and let the show begin. Hey, you, quiet at the back.
Be quiet. Shut it up. Dum bam 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 bam. Thought I'd add some drum beats in.
That's the remix version. Hello and welcome to the FilmFile. I'm Lee Ford.
I'm Andy Beacon.
And welcome to your favourite film podcast by film geeks for film geeks.
I mean, it does make me wonder, if you were the last man on Earth, what would be the first thing that you do? Before we get into the show, what would be the first thing that you would do?
Good question. What would you do? I'd take the car, I'd drive out of the city. I jokingly took part in a thing a few years ago, which was, what would you do if the zombie apocalypse happened? And I found the perfect spot to hide away in. So I would go to there because I think, you want to get out of the cities, and because of all the smell. And then I'd have to clearly go looking for food. And then I would find as many. I'd do the thing that Will Smith does. I'd have a variety of cars to drive around in, but I think find food. I'm so practical. I'd be like, oh yeah, I've got to take control of the situation, and then of course I'd try, as long as the power was on, try to catch up with all the films that I should have been reviewing for this show, and the deep dives I should have been watching. I'd be doing that. I'm doing the podcast on my own to myself.
Going, you won't
Andy,
send out distress messages.
Andy, why aren't you editing?
You won't send out distress messages. You'll be sending out like edited podcasts.
Yeah.
Here's me talking about a film that Andy spoke about 3 years ago.
Yeah. Finally got round to watching.
Does it show how much of a nerdy geek that I am, that my first thought would be to go to a library and learn how to do things?
Well, no, actually, it's very practical. It is very practical. First thing you do, learn how to.
I was thinking this through. Is like, obviously, I'd want to go to a cinema because I can run projectors, etc. But if the power's not working, I need to know how to get the power working. But can I make a manual, like a portable generator? But how do you connect them? So it all tracked back, and I thought through everything that I needed to do. And went, I need to go research how to build things and maintain things and get power grids running. So I'm going to a library.
Yeah, good point. You thought this through better than I have. My other half said if there's a zombie apocalypse, she just wouldn't be able to do with all the running. Yeah. She'd rather be a zombie because it's more about the walking than the running.
Yeah, you can just plod around at your own pace that way.
Yeah, who cares?
It's just like being in Meadowhall, isn't it? It's just like, shop window.
For those people in Utah, Meadowhall is a shopping mall. Anyway.
We call it Meadow Hell.
And there you go. So if you want to know more about the FilmFile, all you have to do is
head on over to Twitter and follow us at FilmFile UK. And when you follow us, I will follow back because I'm that kind of person. But if you then unfollow me, like those dicks that keep following and building and harvesting, I will unfollow you, and then I'll track you down and make your life a misery. But that's a separate story altogether. Head on over to Twitter, follow us at FilmFile UK. You can head over to other social media platforms. Basically, just look for FilmFile UK on Facebook, TikTok, whatever, and you'll probably find us. You can email us with any thoughts, comments, suggestions, films that you love, top films, least favourite films of all time.
Films you want us to track down that you only remember a partial scene from, or a character in a segment we like to call It's That Man in That Film. What's it called?
Yep, we will happily decipher whatever clues you can give and try to work out how you can get your hands on that film. Or you can tell me why I'm wrong about black and white films made out of colour films. Or you can tell me that you agree with me, that if they're going to shoot something for black and white, shoot it for black and white.
Anyway, rant over.
Podcast at filmfile.uk.
Anyway, this week we've got a deep dive, and this week we've got another deep dive for you. And you know that we are big fans here at the FilmFile of Stephen King. Another big fan is Frank Darabont, who does justice to Stephen King. And he does justice to Stephen King's 1996 novel, or continuing story, if you got it the first time round, of The Green Mile.
Trailer.
Starring Tom Hanks as a death row prison guard during the Great Depression who witnesses supernatural events following the arrival of an enigmatic convict, played beautifully by the late Michael Clark Duncan at the facility. David Morse, Bonnie Hunt, Doug Hutchinson, and the great James Cromwell appear as well in supporting roles. That's all you need to know, isn't it, really, from the plot?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. So, following on from Darabont's success of The Shawshank Redemption, and of course later The Mist, this was a telling, heart-rending story of heart-rending story of what's the word I'm looking for? God, I'm so tired. He's innocent, isn't he?
Yeah. Well, you could just refer to him as the Towering Coffee, a mild-mannered black man who's been sentenced to death for the brutal rape and murder of 2 girls. But there's something more to Coffee, and his gentle nature hides a powerful secret.
This is the heart-rending story of John Coffey, a physically imposing but mild-mannered black man who's been sentenced to death after being convicted of raping and murdering 2 little white girls. He joins 2 condemned convicts on the block, one of whom is to be executed. This is a story of injustice. It's a story of hope, all with that wonderful Stephen King element of the supernatural that makes us care so much for this towering giant of a man. I saw this, and like everyone else who saw this, I cried at the end. Darabont gets Stephen King. They have a simpatico in their storytelling. He knows the right beats to take from a King story. He doesn't always stick truly to the text, but what he delivers it in a way that you can imagine King just being so happy with, because he understands Stephen King's voice. In The Shawshank and in The Mist, he gets King, and that's why I think I'd like to see Darabont do more in the King universe. But while not as well received as Shawshank, I think that's because of the sentimentality aspect of it. But that's to take nothing away with it, because it's a very, very powerful and beautifully told film that, as I said, if you see it, will make you cry as well. Andy, did you like this one? Were you a fan of the books? Because it started out as a series of books, didn't it?
Serialized novel. Yeah, in 1996, when the serialized novels were coming out, I was buying them on release day, and hastily looking forward to the next part coming out. I thought it was a very unique way for King to release a story at that point in time.
Yeah, it's a throwback to the classics of Dickens. That's how Dickens did it.
Yeah. I was initially worried that maybe the way that he'd structured it would have made it feel disjointed, but no, it worked so well in serialized form. But then I then picked up the full volume at the end of buying all the serialized ones, and it still works well as a fluid story. And when it was getting adapted for the 1999 film by Frank Darabont, I got excited simply because Darabont's name being attached to it made me remember how good Shawshank was and how well he'd adapted that. He could do the prison drama aspect, and he clearly could tap into King. And when I watched this film at the cinema, like yourself, I was in tears by the end of it. I already knew what the story was going to be. I'd read the book twice over by that point, but it was portrayed so marvelously. The cast lineup, I mean, Hanks apparently stayed in character on set at all times, even when King paid him a visit to the set and was looking around, and he looked at the electric chair and said to Tom Hanks, do you want to have a seat in Old Sparky? And Hanks in character went, well, no, sir, I'm in charge of the facilities. And he's just like, wow, that's great. But James Cromwell's always great to watch. Sam Rockwell, I kept forgetting that Sam Rockwell was in this film.
Until re-looking at this, I'd forgotten he was in. I mean, I knew Barry Pepper was in it. I remember Barry Pepper. But I couldn't remember Rockwell being in the cast.
Harry Dean Stanton has a very slight role in there, but has presence in doing it. David Morse, but Michael Clarke Duncan steals everything in the film, even though the focus is about him, but the focus is on Tom Hanks's Paul Edgecombe character. But it's the presence of Michael Clarke Duncan, the very imposing presence. I mean, they've used camera trickery, they've used like angles, etc., to make him more imposing than what he was, because apparently he's slightly shorter than James Cromwell in real life. But he was just dominating the screen. You believed he was that hulking presence, and he was so gentle in his approach. The heart, the emotion of this film absolutely captivated me when I first watched it. And despite the fact that I've bought it on DVD, it was still in its shrink wrapper, because I've never rewatched it since it came out of the cinema. And I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was at the back of my mind that was stopping me from rewatching this 2 decades later, until I finally sat down to rewatch it in preparation for making notes this week. And I realised within 15 minutes what it was that was putting me off. It's because I knew how much it would cripple me emotionally.
It
Within
is.
15 minutes, I was already starting to feel tears start to build up, because I knew where the story was going, and I didn't want it to go that way. It's one of those films where you want it to have a different ending each time that you're watching it, because you always want things to go a different way, but you understand that they have to go this way. It's majestic, is how I describe this film.
I just want to point out one thing. This is a long film. It's just short of 3 hours. Doesn't feel long because what
No.
Darabont does, and Darabont, I want to see more of Darabont on the screen, because he gets cinema, and he, as I said before, he's got this relationship with King text. He brings out the best of Stephen King's text, and doesn't always stay true to it, as with The Mist. The ending of The Mist is a shocking, horrific ending that isn't part of the book, and he gives this story this sort of very initially a very deceptively easygoing kind of absorbing approach to telling this
Mm.
story. And then it becomes heart wrenching, and it's got this sort of supernatural element to it, which is slight, which again is very King. I mentioned in one of my neat things reading a Stephen King story, and he brings in a supernatural element quite late into the story, and because it's King, it's there, and you accept it, and you do with this. It doesn't need explaining, and it's often with this film that the supernatural element is absorbed into an emotionally powerful piece of storytelling. And as I said, it's a long film, but it never feels long because Darabont embeds it with heart and an appreciation of the characters, and he lets the story unfold in front of you with some well crafted characters. And again, he does that thing. He takes the King characters and he makes them real on screen. There's humor in it.
Yeah.
There's this huge, heartbreaking emotional release at the end. There's outrage, there's anger through it, and Darabont matches King's style of storytelling, and they are in simpatico with each other. And I just want to mention as well, because you talk about Michael Duncan Clarke being an absolute revelation in this, and the heart of the story, but it's testament to Tom Hanks as such a good actor that you never really talk about how great Hanks is, because you
Mm.
just expect Hanks to be good, and he's sublime in this, and he's downplayed, and he is an emotional core to this story. You couldn't have Hank's character without being able to tell everything around it. He's the eye of the storm to a degree, and you just quickly forget how great Hanks is, and he's not showy. And that's what I always like about Hanks. He's never you never get the feeling he's overacting. He's not giving you the big scenes. He does it so well that makes it more painful. He downplays it. That's why is the everyman actor,
Yeah.
because he makes you feel. He makes you feel as a human being rather than the big performer. And you talk about the key moments in this film. But at the heart of it is a very, very quiet Tom Hanks who just adds the heart and soul to this film. And because it's not flashy performance, you go to other aspects, and I think that is the joy of Tom Hanks.
As with all Stephen King's stories, be it in book form or on film, it is interesting revisiting them in this post-Dark Tower era, where we know that King deliberately links so many things together. And watching this film and realizing that when they talk about where did John Coffey come from, nobody knows. He just kind of came from nowhere. And then you got his powers, his shining ability. Obviously, there's the hints of like maybe he's got the shine, like Danny has in The Shining. But for Dark Tower fans out there, and if you've never read The Dark Tower but you think you're a Stephen King fan, you really need to read The Dark Tower, because it really does embrace everything that he's ever done. I can only assume that John Coffey was a breaker. He was breaking the beams and he somehow escaped, and that's how he got into our world, because the hints that it's got of his abilities and what he's come from suggests that he comes from Midworld. He comes from that alternate world that's holding the universe together. And that's what makes going back and revisiting early Stephen King stuff interesting, now that we've had the Dark Tower series of books to tell us that there's little references in pretty much everything. I got so much from this film this second time round. It's only my second time in watching it in over 2 decades.
I've seen it a couple of times. I've only seen it on TV appearances. And it's one of those, if it's on, I'm instantly drawn to it.
And I actually think that I prefer Green Mile to Shawshank Redemption.
Really?
I adore Shawshank, but I think I agree with Stephen King on this one, that the Green Mile is the most faithful adaptation of any of his material to date. And I could just really connect with it in so many ways. It's, King's a master of horror, but it works so well when he does dramatic things, and Darabont really taps into that beautifully. It looks amazing as well. It looks so perfect. The time period it's set in allows it to tackle lots of social issues, including race issues, which is prominent throughout. But like you say, there's jokes in there. It's fun, it's vibrant, but it's also heartfelt, sympathetic, and empathetic. It's over 3 hours long, but it feels it needs to be, because it allows us to grow along the passage of time that the people on the Green Mile are going through. And it gets you to understand all the characters and how their lives are affected by Coffey's presence. Marvellous film. Absolutely marvellous. If you've never watched Green Mile, it's out there somewhere. Hang on a minute. I'll find out which services it's on.
That's my next question.
The Green Mile. If you've never watched The Green Mile, then get yourself on it. It's available on Sky Cinema and also Now TV Cinema, but it's also available on Netflix, so there's no excuse. And if you don't want to subscribe to either of those services, you can pick it up for rental on streaming services from about £2.50 upwards, or just buy yourself the DVD or Blu-ray. You can usually pick it up quite cheap online.
So that's this week's deep dive, The Green Mile. As Andy said, well worth seeing, but beware if you're going back to it and you're revisiting. That ending doesn't change.
Take some tissues.
It's still there. There is no alternative cut. It still has that heart-rendering, heart-breaking finale. But you got game-changing elements to the Mando TV series. This was, season 2.5. You've got a new ship, as you said. You've got more of the backstory. You've got the fact that Mando isn't going to be now part of this guild, a part of the Mandalorians, because he revealed himself. All right, I'll repeat that. He showed his helmet. No, he took his helmet out. No, he took it off.
Did he play with his dark saber while he was at it?